The Awful Desert by Ginzberg. Just as Israel had displayed sullenness and lack of faith upon approaching the sea, so did they upon leaving it. Hardly had they seen that the Egyptians met death in the waters of the sea, when they spoke to Moses, and said, God had led us from Egypt only to grant us 5 tokens, to give us the wealth of Egypt, to let us walk in clouds of glory, to cleave the sea for us, to take vengeance on the Egyptians, and to let us sing him a song of praise. Now that all this has taken place, let us return to Egypt. Moses answered, The Eternal said, The Egyptians whom ye have seen today, yes, shall see them again no more forever. But the people were not yet content and said, Now the Egyptians are all dead, and therefore we can return to Egypt. Then Moses said, You must now redeem your pledge, for God said, When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, ye shall serve God upon this mountain. Still the people remained headstrong, and without giving heed to Moses, they set out on the road to Egypt, under the guidance of an idol that they had brought with them out of Egypt, and had even retained during their passage through the sea. Only through sheer force was Moses able to restrain them from their sinful transgression. 72. This was the second of the 10 temptations with which Israel tempted God during their wanderings through the desert. 73. There was one other difficulty with the people that Moses had to overcome. The sea cast up many jewels, pearls, and other treasures that had belonged to the Egyptians, drowned in its waves, and Israel found it hard to tear themselves away from the spot that brought them such riches. Moses, however, said, Do you really believe that the sea will continue to yield you pearls and jewels? 74. From the sea they passed to the desert Shur, a horrible and dreadful wilderness, full of snakes, lizards, and scorpions, extending over hundreds of miles. So deadly is the nature of the snakes that dwell in the desert, that if one of them merely glides over the shadow of a flying bird, the bird falls into pieces. 75. It was in this desert that the following happened to King Shapur. A cohort that he sent through this desert was swallowed by a snake, and the same fate overtook a second and a third cohort. Upon the advice of his sages, he then filled the hides of animals with hot coals wrapped in straw, and had these cast before the snake until it expired. 76. It was then a proof of Israel's great faith in their God, that they obeyed Moses, and without murmur or delay followed him into this frightful wilderness. 77. Therefore did God reward them for their trust in him, for not only were they not harmed by the snakes and scorpions during their many years' stay in the desert, but they were even relieved of the fear of the reptiles, for as soon as the snakes saw the Israelites, they meekly lay down upon the sand. 78. For 3 days they marched through the desert, uncomplaining, but when their supply of water gave out, the people murmured against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? While crossing through the Red Sea they had provided themselves with water, for miraculously the sea flowed sweet for them. And now when the supply was becoming exhausted, they began to give expression to their dissatisfaction. On this occasion they again betrayed their faint-heartedness, for instead of seeking advice from their leader Moses, they began to murmur against him and against God, even though at present they had not yet suffered from lack of water. So poorly did they stand the test to which God has put them, for in fact the very ground upon which they trod had running water beneath it, but they were not aware of this. God had desired to see how they would act under these conditions. 79. The people were all the more exasperated because their joy, when they sighted the springs and hastened to draw from them, turned to keenest disappointment when they tasted of the water and found it bitter. These deluded hopes cast them down spiritually as well as physically, and grieved them, not so much for their own sakes as for those of their young children, to whose pleas for water they could not listen without tears. Some of the thoughtless and fickle of faith among them uttered the accusation that even the former kindness had been granted them so much as a benefit, but rather with a view to the present and much greater privation. These said that death by the hand of the enemy is to be thrice preferred to perishing by thirst, for by the wise man, speedy and painless departure from life is in no way to be distinguished from immortality. The only real death, however, is slow and painful dying, for the dread lies not in being dead, but in dying. While they indulged in these lamentations, Moses prayed to God to forgive the faint of heart their unseemly words, and furthermore, to supply the general want. 80. Mindful of the distress of the people, Moses did not pray long, but uttered his request in a few words, and quickly, as he had prayed, was his prayer answered. God bade him take a piece of a laurel tree, write upon it the great and glorious name of God, and throw it into the water, whereupon the water would become drinkable and sweet. 81. The ways of the Holy One, blessed be he, differ from the ways of man. man turns bitter to sweet by the agency of some sweet stuff, but God transformed the bitter water through the bitter laurel tree. When Israel beheld this miracle, they asked forgiveness of their heavenly Father and said, O Lord of the world, we sinned against thee when we murmured about the water. 82 Not through this miracle alone, however, has Marah become a significant spot for Israel, but especially because their God gave to Israel important precepts, like the Sabbath rest, marriage, and civil laws, and said to the people, If you will observe these statutes, you will receive many more, the 10 Commandments, the Halakot, and the Haggadoth. The Torah, however, will bring you happiness and life. If you will diligently endeavor to walk through life uprightly, so that you will be virtuous in your dealing with men, I will value it as if you had fulfilled all commandments, and will put upon you none of those diseases that I brought Egypt. If, however, you will not be mindful of my laws, and will be visited by diseases, then will I be you physician and will make you well, for as soon as you will observe the laws shall the diseases vanish. 83. The cause for the want of water at Marah had been that for 3 days the people had neglected the study of the Torah, and it was for this reason that the prophets and elders of Israel instituted the custom of reading from the Torah on Saturday, Monday, and Thursday at the public service, so that 3 days might never again pass without a reading from the Torah. 84. From Marah they moved on to Elim. From a distance palm trees made the place look inviting enough, but when the people came close, they were again disappointed. There were not more than 70 palm trees, and they were of stunted growth owing to a lack of water, for in spite of the presence of 12 wells of water, the soil was so barren and sandy that the wells were not sufficient to water it. 85 Here again the marvelous intercession of God in favor of the fate of Israel is shown, for the scant supply of water at Elim, which had hardly sufficed for 70 palm trees, satisfied 60 myriads of the wandering people that stayed there for several days. 86. The men of understanding could at this place see a clear allusion to the fortune of the people. For there are 12 tribes of the people, each of which, if it prove God-fearing, will be a well of water, inasmuch as its piety will constantly and continually bring forth beautiful deeds. The leaders of the people, however, are 70, and they recall the noble palm tree. For in outward appearance as well as in its fruits, it is the most beautiful of trees, whose seed of life does not lie buried deep in the roots, as with other plants, but soars high, set like the heart in the midst of its branches, by which it is surrounded as a queen under the protection of her bodyguard. The soul of him who has tasted piety possesses a similar spirit. It has learned to look up and ascend, and itself ever busy with spiritual things and the investigation of divine beauty, disdains earthly things, and considers them only a childish play, whereas that aspiration alone seems serious. 87. It was at Elim, where at the creation of the world, God had made the 12 wells of water, and the 70 palm trees, to correspond to the 12 tribes and the 70 elders of Israel, that Israel first took up the study of the law, for there they studied the laws given them at Marah. 88.